Good evening, everyone. I'll call our special meeting of the York County School Board to order. It's Monday, March the 9th. It's actually sun shining outside. There's nothing white left on the ground, and it's actually warm, so it's a good day. We have a lot on our agenda this evening, so we're going to get right to it. We have 3 presentations. The first one's going to be on our literacy model update. So, Dr. Shandor.
Thank you, Mr. Medford. I'm going to turn to Dr. Guy, our Chief Academic Officer, who will introduce our first presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Shandor. Good evening, Chairman Medford, members of the board, Dr. Shandor. If you'll recall, back in September, I shared division academic performance that related to the York County School Division's strategic plan. During that presentation, the board asked for a mid-year update on the division's progress toward meeting our benchmarks in reading, specifically in grade 3. Tonight, Candy Skinner will provide you with an update on our progress in this area and how the implementation of our new K-5 literacy model is guiding our work toward the strategic plan objective. Ms. Skinner.
Okay, thank you. As you may recall, this slide was shared with you during that presentation in September. 2013 was a new benchmark year for York County School Division because our students were assessed for the first time on the more rigorous 2010 standards of learning, as was the rest of the state of Virginia. When we shared this information in September, the concern that was shared by this board was that while YCSD was 6 points above the state average in FY14, our performance declined by 5 percentage points from the previous year. It is important to note that the state average also declined that year by 3 percentage points. As you can see from this chart, none of our elementary schools met the YCSD benchmark of 82.5%, which is established by our strategic plan for FY14. During this presentation, Dr. Guy also shared several components of the new K-5 literacy model that will assist our teachers and students with the rigor of these new state assessments. Tonight, my presentation is going to consist of 3 components. First, I will share a brief update on the K-5 literacy model. Then I'll provide an overview of the new resources and materials that we have purchased or provided to our teachers and students this year. The presentation will conclude with a summary of the progress monitoring structures that we have implemented to help us meet the wide variety of student needs. In August, I presented an overview of the K-5 literacy model, and in that presentation, I shared the feedback we gathered from both parents and teachers in the development of that model. As you might recall, there were some specific conceptual changes I shared with you that evening about our model, and I'd like to give you an update on a few of those this evening. One of the major conceptual changes in that model was the framework of our daily schedule. The core of the literacy block now includes reading workshop, word study, and writing workshop. With the adoption of this new model, we've added 60 additional minutes to the K-2 literacy block on a daily basis, and we've also added 30 additional minutes daily to our grade 3 through 5 literacy block. During the school year, we have collected feedback from teachers through evaluations, surveys, conversations with teachers and principals, and through our literacy drop box located on our intranet site. And based on this feedback, it's evident that teachers do appreciate this additional instructional time. Students now have more time for guided reading with the teacher. They also have more time for independent reading where they can build stamina for longer periods of reading time. And they now have a devoted time for writing within that framework. Another change in our model is the gradual release of responsibility framework. And this framework for instruction begins with the teacher modeling a new skill or strategy in a whole or small group setting while the students watch, and then it ends with the students demonstrating that skill or strategy independently. And ultimately, it's through this model that we are developing strategic readers and writers. Prior to the adoption of the new model, the school division provided elementary students with a Basel textbook for reading. If you might recall from when you were in school, most of us used a Basel type of book. And a basel is really a large book that contains an anthology of stories. As seen on the left is a picture of one there. Many teachers used this resource to teach the students in their classroom, no matter what their reading level ability might have been. The new model emphasizes our commitment to teaching students on their instructional reading level during small, guided reading groups, while helping students find just right fit books for their reading during independent time. In these pictures, you can see a gradient continuum. On the right, you'll see some of the new differentiated materials that are now used by our teachers, as well as the student book bins, which are created by teachers and matched to each student's independent reading level within the classroom. And typically, you'll see these more in the K through 2 classrooms, the book bins. As students get older, they're able to self-select books that are really at their independent reading level. These materials are now allowing us to have reading instruction that's customized to the child's unique needs rather than a one-size-fits-all type of approach. For example, if a first grader is in a classroom and they're reading on a third grade level, the teacher can now use instructional reading materials that challenge the student during reading groups and during independent reading time, while the student can then also self-select materials that are at their independent reading level. The literacy model also emphasizes teachers using ongoing informal assessments to monitor student learning. This is done so that classroom instruction is always aligned to the student's level, interventions are provided as soon as they are needed, and the teachers have a keen understanding of each student as a reader. In years past, we used 9-week assessments to provide this important information for making adjustments in the classroom. Now, with ongoing informal assessments provided by the teacher, they have feedback so they can look at student growth for all students, no matter if they're on, below, or above grade level. Now, it is important to note that the type of assessments we're talking about are not specifically aligned to SOLs. What we're really talking about is looking at students' independent reading levels and instructional reading levels. In the video I'm about to show you, you will see, ironically, a teacher named Mrs. Skinner, and she is not related to me, but she is a third grade teacher from Waller Mill Elementary School. And she's going to, in this video, you'll see her meeting with a guided reading group. And in the video, you will actually see her administering an informal running record, which we call an IRR. And during this time, she's going to be listening to a student read and recording information about that student as that child's reading.
When Ruby came back to school, she was wearing a red bow and a jacket before she got her hands and jumped into it. I like your bow. I know. Flash, please take out your mouth cups.
So as you may have been able to hear in that video, each of the students in the guided reading group, and there's about 5 students that are surrounding her. Each of them are reading aloud, but Mrs. Skinner is actually listening to one of those students in that guided reading group read, and she's recording important information about the child's accuracy, comprehension, and fluency while the child is reading. So when the IRR is actually complete, the teacher's going to have a sheet that looks very similar to this, and I know it's not real clear, but that's basically what it will look like. And then that teacher will use that information to make instructional decisions about how to instruct that student during guided reading groups and also during independent reading time. For example, when a teacher may identify that a student is struggling, let's say, with fluency. And so based upon that information, when that child might be reading independently in class, she may have a paraeducator or another adult in the classroom working on fluency skills with that student. Last year, our teachers were trained on this technique, and this year we've provided follow-up training to our teachers. This video that you just saw actually came from a division-wide training that we provided in January to all of our K-5 teachers. And on that day, teachers from around our school division came together in grade-level teams to watch real YCSD teachers modeling components of the literacy model. We felt this training was successful for 2 reasons. First, it validated the work that our teachers are doing. And secondly, it provided teachers with an opportunity to walk away with strategies that their own teachers are doing all around the school division that they could then implement in their classroom. Based on the feedback that we have received, we are going to continue to provide some more training in this area for our teachers. We recognize that, every teacher's on a different level of implementation with this type of assessment. So we're going to continue to provide professional development. And one of the things that we are hearing from teachers is that they feel like they're getting to know their students more now as readers than ever before. During a training that we did in November, we always collect feedback from our teachers at the end of a training session. And this is an anonymous comment that a teacher left. She said, "I feel like I know my students better now," and that was in the first semester, that was November of this year, "than I did all last year, really. The small group time is better, the nonfiction is great." So it's very exciting for us. So the second part of my presentation tonight, I'm going to provide you with an overview of some of the resources and materials that we have purchased to support the new literacy model. As you may recall, the Reading Basel anthology that we used for our Tier 1 primary instruction was about 13 years old. York County went through an instructional materials adoption process last year, and with the input of teachers and parents, we were able to purchase benchmark literacy materials. As you can see from the picture on this slide, with the adoption came lots of materials for our teachers and students to use. Some of these materials included whole class mini lesson materials, leveled, guided, and independent reading books, detailed teachers editions, informal and formal assessments, and online resources and ebooks for students to use at home and at school. It's also important to know that while these materials were adopted off the state adoption list, and they align to our state standards, they don't cover every standard. And so our teachers, of course, use the local, state, and local curriculum to teach. And so these materials are a supplement to them, but of course they bring in additional materials as well as they're teaching. One thing I do want to share tonight, I think it's important to note that as we adopted these benchmark materials, there were concerns that were shared to us by our teachers in regards to some of the materials, the assessments, and the online resources. And I want to share with you when those concerns emerged, the literacy leadership team, myself, and principals began to meet immediately to problem solve some of the solutions for the concerns that were shared with us. I personally made contact with the CEO of Benchmark Literacy, and we've been meeting on a regular basis ever since that time. I believe that some of the concerns that have been shared by our teachers are valid, and Benchmark is committed to ensuring that they correct these issues in a timely manner. Not only I've spoken with the owner on multiple occasions, a team from Benchmark actually came to our school division in February, and they spent 2 days observing classrooms, meeting with teachers and principals, and also with division level administrators. And they walked away with what we call a punch list of things that they are going to be working on and finding resolution to. Some of the things, I'll give you a couple examples of some of the things that they've done. The online site that when we originally brought that to teachers in November, there were numerous glitches to it, including, in my opinion, the training that was done with it. So Benchmark has been working closely with myself, principals, our IT staff, to develop and make improvements to that site. They've actually released several updates since this concern initially emerged, and they've also extended our online contract by 1 year, so to offset this year for us, which has been very helpful. Teachers also had concerns originally when we started our unit assessments. The concern was that some of the assessments were just very difficult for our students. Benchmark has rewritten those unit assessments for us, and they've provided those to us in a Word format for us to use with our teachers. Benchmark has also offered to provide additional training to our school division free of charge to offset the training that was done in November on the website and on some of those online resources. Another resource that I'd like to share with you this evening, in addition to our Benchmark materials, each elementary school also has a literacy room that holds high-interest fiction and nonfiction reading materials that teachers can check out and use in their classrooms. This slide shows an example of one such literacy room in our schools. And if you were to walk into this room, you would find single and multiple copies of some of our titles that we have there, because many of our teachers like to do literature circles. They like to meet with students and bring in books so that students can use them in literature circles, but also have them as a free choice during independent reading time. We're also working with our gifted coordinator to purchase high-interest books that are at a higher reading level for our literacy rooms this year. Another resource that we have provided to our teachers is On Track by Interactive Achievement. And as you may recall, the board voted last year to support the purchase of this program. And the feedback that we have gathered through evaluations, conversations with teachers and principals, and through our literacy Dropbox is that teachers truly appreciate this program and the information that it's providing to them about their students. As you may recall, On Track is an assessment management system that helps to make sure that we have tight alignment between our assessments and our instruction. In York County, our teachers use On Track in two different ways. First, they use it to develop common assessments, and once a common assessment is given, the teachers analyze the information in professional learning communities or in grade level teams, and they adjust instruction as needed. The picture on this page is actually an example of such a team looking at On Track data. And as they're looking at it, they're looking to see which of the students had mastered that particular concept or content, and then which students still need additional reteaching. The second way that we've used On Track this year is to measure student learning over time. Students in grades 3 through 5 took the student growth assessment in On Track back in September, and they'll take a very similar assessment in March. And once that assessment is given, the teachers can then identify which of the students have mastered that grade level content, and then which students are going to need additional reteaching of some of that content. During the FY 14-15 school year, Dr. Pennycuff worked with the literacy leadership team to research effective Tier 3 interventions for students who require the most intensive interventions to meet success. The Level Literacy Intervention System was selected and purchased using grant funds. LLI is a research-based small group literacy intervention system that's really designed to bring students to grade level achievement in reading. In August, our special education teachers and our reading specialists were trained on this LLI system, as we call it. We now have 238 students who are getting this research-based intervention. We're excited about LLI because it represents a significant step forward for us as a school division in supporting our elementary special education teachers and their efforts to give specialized instruction to our students with disabilities. So this brings me to the third part of my presentation this evening, which is really going to be focusing on how our schools are monitoring student progress and preparation for state assessments. So in order to ensure that there is ongoing progress monitoring, each school creates what we call a school improvement plan, or as we sometimes call them SIPs or SIPs. And on this slide, you'll see just a small example of one school's SIP plan. This is just a small page out of one. Our SIP plans contain goals and objectives that align to the York County School Division strategic plan. And among all the goals that are in the SIP, there is a goal in every elementary school for grade 3 reading and also for subgroup populations who are struggling to meet those grade level reading targets. To develop this, the school actually collaborates together as a team. They look at their data and they create their goals and objectives in that plan. And then they meet throughout the year to make sure the action steps are being implemented with fidelity. And they look at the data and how their students are doing, and they make adjustments as they need to. In addition to that, I also meet with each of the principals in the elementary schools 3 times a year to review the school improvement plans. Many of our schools also have created a data wall where they monitor student reading progress throughout the year. And teams of teachers, reading specialists, and administrators meet regularly to update student data and adjust that data wall continuum. And you'll see a picture of one there for you. And during these data wall meetings, teachers discuss interventions and enrichment for students at both ends of that continuum. We take that time to talk about classroom strategies that are working, and then also to seek input from specialists and administrators for students who might be struggling. All of our schools monitor students through our reading progress monitoring system, which is an internal software program where teachers input reading assessment data for each of their students. We use this information to help us triangulate if our students are above, on, or below grade level. So that's just another way in which our schools are monitoring student progress. And the last way I'll share with you is we're monitoring through something called a tiered system of supports model. And as you know, all of our schools were fully credited this year, and we're not required to go through an academic review process. So that's good news. But this year we are sharing some of the information that York River Academy and Bruton High School had with some of the success strategies that they used. When we're sharing that with all 19 of our principals this year, we really wanted to make sure that we shared those strategies. And the schools who missed an AMO this year or had to use a 3-year trailing average to meet state accreditation are implementing pieces of that process that they feel will help improve student performance at their school. So some of the things that you'll see is a train the trainer coaching model. Dr. Pennycuff and her staff train the administrators during these meetings, and you'll see here this is actually a picture of a school admin team meeting with a group of teachers to go over some of those strategies that they've learned. And during that time, they're really working to ensure that we have a tight alignment between our curriculum, instruction, and assessment for Tier 1 instruction. And then principals are also meeting with teachers to look at lesson plans to make sure that we're planning for Tier 2 students, reteaching those students who don't get the instruction the first time around, and making sure that we have Tier 3 interventions in place for those students who need additional assistance. So that's just another thing that we're doing at a school level. So this really brings me to the end of my presentation, and I want to just take a moment to say how much I appreciate you listening tonight to hear about the progress we're making on our model, the new materials that we're providing to support our new model, and then also how our schools and our division are really monitoring student progress and making sure that we're moving our students forward. On behalf of our elementary teachers and administrators in York County, I'd like to invite you in to see some of the things that I've shared with you tonight. Our teachers work very hard, and they're very proud of the work that they're doing, and they would love to share some of those things with you. So at this time, I'd like to take any questions that you might have.
Great, thank you. Great presentation.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Questions?
Well, one's a comment, and I actually talked about this last month at our regular meeting because I was at Bethel Manor and I saw this in action, and I was so very impressed.
Thank you.
So I want to commend the teachers, and I know that that's one school. It's going on at all of the elementary schools, but I was so very impressed with what they're doing, and my hat's off to you. Congratulations.
Thank you, and I'll share that with them. I know that'll mean a lot to them.
I, too, this has been great information and seeing where we're going. And I know I have been one of those that have always asked, we said we're going to have a high percentage rate of kids reading on grade 3 level in the past, and how does this work when we change the benchmark that we use? So that's great going forward with that. My questions are a couple regarding the benchmark materials and the resources.
Yes, ma'am.
How do you speak to the diversity of the materials that you buy that speaks to the diversity of that student population?
One of the things that the State Department of Education does when they're adopting materials to put on that state adoption list, that is one of the components that they look for. And so we know that when we go to that state list and we look at the materials that are there, that's something that's purposely looked for. And we also know that by looking at these materials, and this is our first time around with these materials, we do feel like they do represent our students. Has a lot of nonfiction, much more than what they've had before. But we do feel that they are diverse materials, and I can certainly get additional information for you in regards to that. Or Dr. Guy, if you had anything you wanted to share.
It's also part of our instructional materials review. There's
Thank
also
you.
a component in the early phase when we're looking at all the materials on the state adoption list in terms of the cultural diversity. That's one of the components that we examine.
And the reason I ask is sometimes when you look at a picture book, what does it look like? So as I look through this report, fantastic material. Do I see the diversity? If it is, it's so tiny that I'm using bifocals to get to it. And I don't want the community to see that.
Right.
The other thing is, if we have each year, and you know for me, when we give us the status report of the grades that come in from the state, I've always said when we talk about the achievement gap, if we got one, bring me a source to solving it. So does this, with the literacy, because the state is still going to give us that information based on achievement gap. So as we move forward with this, how can we identify if it's meeting that, if it's helping with that? And I guess that's long-term, or?
You want me to go ahead? Sorry. One of the things that I will share is the process that we're going through, the tiered support of the tiered system of support, because when you look at Tier 2 and Tier 3 instruction, what are we doing for those student groups that aren't getting it the first time? And so the process that we went through with Bruton High School and YRA, that process is being repeated or retaught, if you will, across the division. And again, as Ms. Skinner shared, we're not requiring schools to necessarily implement lock, stock, and barrel the academic review process, but they're taking pieces out of it. Now, if they missed one of our AMO categories, then we're asking that they focus in on that. If they had to use a 3-year trailing average to meet accreditation, we're asking that they pull those pieces in. The other piece that Ms. Skinner mentioned is the LLI, the Leveled Literacy Intervention piece. That's huge for us because that is a piece that our special educators are using with students who need Tier 3 intervention. So those are the pieces that have been implemented. I think that the materials from Benchmark, there is a great variety in the materials. There's also, with the ongoing informal running records where teachers know exactly where students are. And I don't want to say that they didn't know that before. They did. They did it on a quarterly basis. But the informal running record is something that gives them information more frequently. And so knowing where a student is and even giving them the literacy materials that are at their level, not just during independent reading, but when they're doing small group reading, they can give them materials that match their reading level.
And I'd like to add, if I could, real quick, one of the things that we do, we don't want to wait to the end of the year to find out, looking at our subgroup populations, which were successful and which were not. Each of our schools in that school improvement plan identify their students in need at the beginning of the year. They have goals and objectives in their school improvement plan for those specific students. And so they are monitoring the progress of those students throughout the school year and putting interventions in place when needed. If an intervention is not working, they're very quickly changing that intervention around. And the more interventions that we're providing now to our teachers, the more tools they have to do that. So that is something that's ongoing at the school level, not just end of year. You know, that's our hope. We want to help the students right then and there as much as we can.
My last question, if I may, and I'm done. Again, this is fantastic information, and I don't want to take away from any of the hard work that's been done. You talk of the successes at Bruton High School and YRA. I'm always a supporter. We got to get our kids out and in front and advertise and show pictures and an article here and an article there because they have made great strides, and I want to pat them on the back for that. Have we done anything with pictures, with articles that show our students and how much mileage have we gotten? You know, I'm shout from the rooftops. They made significant improvement. So have we done anything like that along the line with pictures, with maybe not so much advertisement, but to acknowledge
PR.
the great way. PR, yes, thank you.
Are you talking specifically about the literacy model?
Or anything at Bruton High School and YRA that they have come up to you mentioned it in your report,
Right.
so that's why I just made a note to say, what are we doing to publicize?
Well, I will speak, and I know, Dr. Guy, you may want to add to this, but I know that during our sessions where Dr. Pennycuff is leading us through, we actually have had administrators from those schools stand up and speak to the successes they've had. We use them as mentors for our other principals. Principals are calling to say, okay, tell me how you handled this, or what did you do for this piece? Because we know that was hard work that they did, but they were very successful, and our other principals are learning from them. So we're using them as models there. In regards to the other PR piece, Dr. Guy, I don't know if you want to add to that.
I will share that last September when we updated the board, there was quite a bit of information shared about the success for Bruton High School and YRA and to what we attributed that success. We didn't identify individual students. I know the stories that we shared with regard to students and teachers screaming in the hallway when they had a student who had previously taken an SOL test 3 times and not passed it, who had finally passed it.
Or more.
Yes, or more. And the joy.
Publicize it outside of the schools.
I think we have shared, one of the pieces, and Dr. Pennycuff, when we do the VSBA showcase, that's one of the items that I have suggested to staff, that we want to showcase the work that we did with academic review and then how we're mimicking that process. With the literacy model, I can tell you, we did present the process that we went through to adopt our new literacy model at the VSBA showcase last summer, and had quite a very positive reaction to that last summer.
You know, I guess if don't go away. I guess for me, and I'm making a big to-do, in a time when publicity across this country is poor, we should be shouting at the rooftops about the accomplishments of our kids. And that's where I am with
Yeah.
that. And I'm sorry,
Oh,
Dr.
no,
Pennicuff.
thank you. I'm glad to have this opportunity to share this with you. I haven't done this yet. I intend to do this over spring break, but Dr. Megan Shannon Moran from the College of William and Mary has invited me to write an article with her about our successes. So I'm waiting to spring break to have time to do that with her. But that should be coming soon. And then, in addition to that, I already submitted the snippet for her next book on coaching that used York River and Bruton as our example.
The community, the public,
And
the newspapers.
And
That's-
Mrs. Haywood, I want you to know too that as a member of the K-12 Advisory Committee for the General Assembly, that I wrote them, the members of that committee, an email and definitely bragged about the successes at Bruton High School.
Well, additionally, we had Delegate Pogge here, and
Right,
two
we
of you,
did.
we walked around the school, and you guys not only got to see it in action, but you got to hear all the successes from Dr. Swanson and Dr. Butler and a bunch of the teachers
We
as
need to
well.
write editorial to the paper.
Because I definitely think that their successes could be used as a model for the state.
Yeah, very much so. I'm through.
I just had one question. We hear this a lot, and I don't know if you could talk to it just for a bit, reference to research-based, like the LLI. When we hear the word, or a parent hears that we're using research-based materials or methodology, what does that really mean to the parent, to the teacher, to the community, to our school division?
Well, for something to be considered to be research-based, there's a certain requirement of data that they have to use to show the success of their program. And each company will go about that in a different way. When we purchased LLI, and maybe I should have Dr. Pennycuff come back up because that is her program, but I'll just speak very quickly about that. And we can provide you with additional information. A company does need to show to us that we've had significant improvements over a certain period of time with a program for it to be considered research-based. It also is endorsed by people that we consider to be experts in the field, as this is something that they say, yes, this is powerful and this is good. In this particular program with LLI has been, it's hallmarked in many of the educational communities as just a premium program and with good success. So we're very fortunate and very excited to have it, and we're hearing positive things from our teachers.
And that's fine. I don't need any additional information. People hear that term every once in a while. I kind of wanted that explained out to the community a little bit, that we go beyond just picking something. We go
Yes.
deeper into that.
We do, and we go through a whole process of review at our level. Dr. Pennycuff just went through it recently for secondary materials, and so we bring in a team to really look at it to make sure it's exactly what we want and meet our needs.
All right. Anything else?
Well, I just had 2 quick questions. One on the literacy rooms. Do our schools have space for literacy rooms? Are we okay with space?
As far as I know, we've had them for years.
Okay.
We are doing fine on space. Of course, we always want to add more to our literacy rooms, and each year we try to build those based on what our students need. As far as I know, we do have space. I've not been told in anywhere that we have not.
Okay, I was just thinking about some of the schools like Yorktown Elementary that's so crowded. I'm
Some of the
thinking,
schools
where-
have a smaller space
Yeah.
environment in which
I should
the
say, and maybe they're
materials
creative with their space.
Are,
A hallway.
are smushed into, and others have a little bit more space in them.
Sometimes you might see them on a stage if
Yes.
they need be.
And I've got to ask this question. The scores at the beginning that we saw where we had dropped, I think every school had dropped, and the state had also dropped. This is the grade 3 reading SOL from last
Yes.
May, June. Okay, any reason why they dropped? Any idea why the scores dropped?
The state or
From
the,
2014 to
are you talking about the state level or
Uh,
our school division?
York County.
I know that our materials were older, and there's always an implementation dip, but this was really the second year. And so we, of course, would want to continue to build and continue to grow. We've spent a lot of time as a division talking about that, and Dr. Guy had mentioned this in her presentation before. We think stamina could be a small part of that. Once they break the test in third grade, they break it into two pieces, but then fourth and fifth grade, it's a long test. It's rigorous. And so we are continuing to try to build in independent reading time to build stamina with our students, to help them become more comfortable with the assessments. On Track is going to help us with that. When assessment is new, it takes a little while for teachers to really understand the components of that assessment and mirror that in their classrooms. On Track helps us with that. And so that could have been a part of it as well. And so we're hopeful with these new things that I've shared with you tonight. And as teachers are becoming more comfortable with these state assessments, recently the state just released some information to our teachers that they're using where commonly missed type of questions. Each of our schools have a plan to review that information, but that's at the state level. York County, we're looking at our own specific data, so we look at what the state's saying, but then we're also looking school by school, because we have a report that the state provides to us at each school, so they can see specifically what areas they were maybe missed, and they're working specifically in their school improvement plans to address those specific areas.
Well, I look forward to seeing this year's test results.
Me
because
too.
After this, then it should increase. So.
Well, like I said, we're proud of the work we're doing. Our teachers are working so hard, and we are very hopeful that we're going to have good gains.
Any other questions? Ms. Skinner, excellent job.
Thank you.
Great
Thank
information.
you.
Thank you very much.
That was very thorough.
Great, it's really good questions. Our next item is school calendar. Dr. Shandor, I know that this is going to take us in the direction of talking about next year.
Yep.
So let's go ahead and look at FY 15-16.
All right, thank you, Mr. Medford. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. James, who's going to introduce our next presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Shandor. Mr. Medford, members of the board, this evening, Dr. Jones, the Director of School Administration, will share with you recommendations for next year's calendar. And of course, the plan at this point is this calendar to come to you for approval at the March 30 meeting. So with that in mind, Dr. Jones.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Medford, members of the board, Dr. Shandor, and Cabinet. I will present to you the draft 2015-2016 calendar tonight. You have in your folders a copy of the PowerPoint and a copy of the calendar. First, let me give you some background information regarding the process. The regional calendar consists of representatives from York County, Poquoson, Hampton, Newport News, Gloucester, Williamsburg, James City County, and the New Horizons Regional Education Center. The representatives explore how the instructional calendar can be more regionalized. Now, while the Division Calendar Committee consists of principals, central office staff, teachers, and parents, this committee gives teacher and parent feedback as part of the calendar development. There are, as you know, many challenges in planning a school calendar. First, the Code of Virginia states that local school boards must establish school calendars so that the first day students attend school begins after Labor Day. This year, Labor Day was on September 1st. For the 2015-2016 calendar, Labor Day is on September the 7th. I plan for a 2-week winter break and a full week for spring break. Now, on Election Day, our schools are closed as they are used for polling sites. Schools are also closed on Veterans Day. We have, as you know, a large percentage of students connected with the military. And there is the complexity of finding a site for graduation. In the past, we have held graduation ceremonies on a Friday due to the availability of the site. Now, having that regional calendar provides a continuity of dates for winter break, Martin Luther King Day, President's Day, spring break, and Memorial Day in all of the Peninsula schools. Each division independently, however, will schedule planning and professional development days. The regional calendar also reduces any conflicts for students enrolled in regional programs such as the Governor's School for Science, the Alternative Education Program, the Special Education Programs, and the Career and Technical Programs that are housed at the New Horizons sites. It also gives the Peninsula School Division an opportunity to collectively plan and hold staff development activities. Now, the 2015-2016 draft calendar has 180 student days, 192 returning teacher work days, and 194 new teacher work days, and 7 student assessment and instructional planning days for teachers to finalize grades and to plan for instruction. Let's take a look at the important dates and events. Independence Day falls on a Saturday. Schools and offices will be closed at Friday, July 3rd, in observance. In August, all teachers report on the 26th, and new teachers report on the 24th. 2 additional days are given to new teachers for orientation purposes. Labor Day, as I stated earlier, is September the 7th. All offices and schools are closed. The first day of school begins September the 8th. November 3rd is Election Day and a student holiday. Please note that the majority of our schools, again, are used for polling sites. This day is used for professional development and for student assessment and instructional planning. Veterans Day is November the 11th. This is a student holiday. This day is used for parent conferences at the elementary schools and for staff development at the secondary schools. Also in November, schools and offices will close on the 26th and 27th for Thanksgiving. That Wednesday will be an early dismissal day. In December, there will be 2 full weeks of winter break. And December 20th, that's December 21st through January 1st. Both regional and division committees received great feedback this year on the 2-week winter break. Schools and offices will open on January 4th. Schools and offices will close on January 18th for the Martin Luther King Jr. holiday. First semester exams are scheduled for January 26th, 27th, and 28th. These are also early dismissal days for all schools. At Friday, January 29th, is the Regional and Division-wide Professional Development Day. This is the day that all Peninsula schools come together for staff development. February 15th is President's Day. All schools and offices will be closed. The Regional Committee always designates the first full week in April as spring break. Thus, April 4th through April 8th for the 2015-2016 calendar. On May 30th, schools and offices will be closed for Memorial Day. Second semester exams will be June 14th through June 16th with early dismissals. June 16th will be the last day of school, with graduation being held on June 17th. June 17th will also be a student assessment and planning day for teachers to close out the school year. Now, I think that it is important to take a look at possible makeup days in case of inclement weather conditions. First, the state requires 990 instructional hours or 180 instructional days and 140 instructional hours for high school credit-bearing courses and middle school core courses. Now, that 2015-2016 calendar has the 180 days. Now, this next slide gives you a list of options in case of inclement weather. We can look at early release days becoming full days, and you see that there are 12 there, or holidays becoming student days, or it could be a combination. Other options could be Saturday school or additional minutes added to the day. And that completes my presentation on the draft calendar for 2015-2016. Are there any questions?
When's Easter in April?
Easter is the 27th,
27th.
March. No,
March, okay.
27th. So we have a full week and then spring break.
Okay. Because in the past, we've always had the Monday following Easter is like, but it's always designated as this will be a makeup day if necessary. Because of the 2-week winter break, I assume that's why we lost that Monday.
I think it would be really good if we could explain how the 990 or the 140 instructional hours are calculated. I think with our recent bad weather, that's been the question I've received from teachers and parents every day.
Yeah, I'm gonna let Dr. James.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Shandor. First of all, it varies by levels, because what we're talking about is counted instructional time. So how you calculate that instructional time is different. So I'll first start with elementary. At the elementary level, we cannot count time for lunch or recess, which means if lunch is a half an hour in length and recess is 20 minutes, there are 50 minutes that we can't count from our 6 hours and 36-minute day. Also, when you count instructional time, you have to take into account the early release days, because that's a shortened period of time. I think that's 3 hours and 30 minutes. Also, a 2-hour delay day impacts the amount of time you have available, and an unscheduled early dismissal day also impacts that amount of time. So we actually go through and look at each day and calculate the minutes in the day to come up with the sum total hours in our elementary schools to make sure we're meeting the 990-hour requirement.
And so what are the number of minutes or the number of hours for our elementary schools in this calendar that we will be voting on?
Typically, in that calendar, we would have about 1,008 hours and 32 minutes, something, in that time frame. That's what we had this year, based on the calendar and the number of days, early release days, what have you. So that basically gave us 18 hours, or about 3 days over
For bank time.
what's considered bank time.
So we will have extended time to bank for the upcoming year.
Right, just having the length of the calendar 180 days based on the length of the day, that gives us approximately 3 days over.
With the same time, with not an extension of the day
Right.
next year, but the same time bell schedule that we have today.
Correct.
If the length of the school day stayed the same, yes, ma'am, that's correct.
How many days did we have banked before we went to the 2-week winter break?
I think we had, one snow day, maybe 2, before we did the 2-week. Last year was the first 2-week winter break we've had
It's
for a
been as
while.
high as 2 or 3 at one sometime. Yeah.
I think that what's happened this year and last year too is winter got us pretty good, and it didn't leave. And so, we as a board sit here and we know what we have to do. And we know we need to protect that instructional time and meet the mandates and the requirements. But at the same time, build a calendar that, we have overwhelmingly heard from staff that the 2-week winter break is golden. The spring break, obviously, we can't start before Labor Day. We defeated again in the General Assembly. But even if it passed a General Assembly, we'd have to pass that with our community, because I think that would, even if they said you can open before Labor Day, we've got to find out if our community even would want to open. It may be something that's not favorable in our community. So that would be something we'd have to poll the community on. And then the ending date. So we're kind of like, every year we're squeezed into this box, I guess, of days that we have to meet requirements with. So it's difficult now for me to look at next year's calendar right now, this moment, and say, I don't think we're quite ready yet.
Well, could you go back and tell us about middle school and high school and how many days are banked for those?
Sure. In middle school and high school, it's a little different, because we talk about individual classes. At the middle school level, the core classes must meet for 140 hours. So if you take that middle school day, that's 6 hours and 45 minutes, back out lunch. And we're on a block schedule, but I talk as if it were one day. So you're taking that day and divide it by 8. So you have small increments of time each day that's dedicated to a class. So what happens in the very end, we actually calculate how many instructional hours we would have in each one of those periods and to see whether we're over or we're short time in that schedule to make sure we have the 140 hours. Also, high school credit-bearing classes taught at the middle school level also must have the 140 hours. Foreign language courses are high school credit classes in the middle school. Some of them are. So those classes are not core classes, but you have to make sure those classes also have 140 hours. So that's the complexity of it when you see to get to 140 hours and you take that day, which is the same length as the high school day, but you divide it by 8 classes. When you go to the high school, you have the same length of day, but you only divide it by 7 classes. So each piece of the pie becomes a little bit larger at the high school than it does at the middle school.
So under this calendar and the calendar that we're working on right now, let's forget the snow right now. How many days did we have banked for middle school and high school?
Well, it's hard to talk about days. It's how much time do we have per class?
Or hours? How many hours did we have
You know,
banked? Did we have the 140 hours banked?
Yes.
And then how much extra? What was the total number?
Based on the full calendar, we have some situations where we had to go in to adjust schedules because each school had a schedule, but they made modifications during the year. So our task was to go in and change their schedules and take some of the classes that are not core to actually give us the amount of time that we needed. So it's kind of difficult to talk about 8 periods in 4 schools and which ones were over and under. But we had a number that were under, so we had to make those adjustments in the schedule to make sure we met the 140 hours.
And the high school had over 140
Had
hours.
over, because again, I'll reference the 7 classes versus the 8.
How many hours did the high school have?
Some of them could be,
I think our worst case scenarios was 1,090. We're on pace for 1,090.
well, for the hours in the school year, we
Right.
were over the 990. But for each individual period,
Right.
we were over 10, 13 hours.
Because I believe, because I did a lot of this research back during the 4x4 discussion, and I believe that skinny period actually might provide the most time, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. Yes, it does, because it meets for 55 minutes, and that's based on 110 minutes period versus a 95, 100-minute period. So it really adds up. You multiply those number of minutes by 90 to see how many hours you have.
I tell you, I this time around, it strikes me, you know, we can get the minutes back. We can do what the state says. I mean, we can add on, you know, X number of minutes at the end of the day, whether it's 3 minutes or 20 minutes or whatever. But what we can't get back is instruction time, and this is
A day.
SOLs, you know, are right around the corner. I mean, this is really concerning for a lot of parents, me one of them. I don't know, I guess as we plan, I don't know what the answer is, but I think there's more to this than just getting the minutes back. There's the lost instruction. And I don't know, moving forward, I think we need to really think about that. Because, I mean, we missed, what, 8 days?
8 days.
Now, you take a kid, you know, who has math every day. That's 8 days of math. You take a foreign language, you know, chances are that 8 days they've missed, what, at least 4 of them, basically. So, I mean, that's significant, and I don't know that they're getting that time back. I mean, I wish there was time for them to do it, but I just think it's worthy of looking at, you know, certainly for next year and some contingency plan for that.
And I'm not sure how you
And-
would ever get that time back.
Well, unless you build it
Because,
in
You know,
somehow.
we had 15 minutes, 15 additional minutes at the end of the day.
It doesn't.
That's not really quality time.
I guess what I'm saying
The
is,
quantity, not the quality.
maybe you watch before you start, you know, giving away too many days. You start thinking about that. I mean, we all want time off, but we're here to teach the kids, you know. So, and I'm not, you know, I'm not being the Scrooge or anything like that. I want everybody to take as much time as we can. But the bottom line is they've got to have this instruction. So,
Right.
just food for thought. You know,
You know,
as we come
there's
up
a
on
lot of
next year.
discussions we've been having about meaningful instructional time. When does it occur? And then you have to look at the complexities within a calendar. A calendar is all about trade-offs.
Yeah.
And it's also about when do we get into inclement weather situations. If it's in the fall, we have more opportunity to make it meaningful instructional time. Last school year, a lot of it happened in January. We were able to come to school on President's Day. Mr. Manfred mentioned earlier that we had Easter Monday, I'll use that term, for a holiday that became an instructional day. And we were able to convert some of the earlier release days early in the year. This year, based on the timing of the weather, you know, those options had gone by.
What's
So we
this?
were left with very few options now to the end of the year.
That's right, because it came after President's Day. which
Yes.
When I look through the calendar, I think, well, President's Day's a freebie. I would give that up instantly. You know, that could be a freebie.
Right.
But this year, the snow came the day after.
Well, I think that there's work, I mean, regional committees met, the calendar is aligned with the breaks and stuff with everybody in our area. I guess staff will have further discussion on today, minutes banked, analyzing what we probably are going to need, because I'm thinking that for the past 2 years, we've really gotten hit. And so with the anticipation of weather again next year, we need a plan for something more than what's banked already here. That's what I'm thinking, and I don't know where to go with that. I would be you and your leadership team bringing some options to the board.
If I may, I saved my questions for last. Dr. James, point of clarification. We extended this school year, the days to accommodate for some extra minutes.
Yes.
This calendar that Dr. Jones just went over is based on this extended
No.
today back to what it originally was for this
Right.
year.
It would have
Okay.
the same operation
Okay.
hours for
Okay.
schools.
You mentioned the instructional time did not include recess or lunch. At the elementary school, when kids get off the bus and come in, that clock starts ticking when they sit down in their classrooms for instruction.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. What about at the high school and amongst class time, going from one class to the other?
You know, that past time in between classes, we can count that.
You're able to count
Right.
that by the state?
Yes.
Okay.
At middle school, too.
Yes.
Paige?
You know, it really gets even more complicated, and keep me on track here, Dr. James.
Yes.
When you have a regional program like New Horizons, we may close the doors, but Hampton and Newport News could be open. So our students lose class time, but New Horizons has to be open. So that's one reason the regional calendar was very important, to try to keep everybody on the same track, but it really creates problems there.
Right. If I may add, Mr. Johnson, Joe Johnson at New Horizons, came up with the idea of the regional calendar because in working with his staff, he saw 20-some days where there was a school division that students weren't at New Horizons. So 20 different days because we had different calendars. So that's why we agreed on the major breaks, and those are the same. And as Dr. Jones said, there is some flexibility for other days within the calendar, which still boils down to, for someone, that's missed instructional time. Because if we're in school and Newport News is closed, New Horizons is closed because they follow the Newport News calendar. So the importance of the regional calendar for our students, I think, is really paramount as we try to build a calendar.
And it's important to also note that the last 2 years have been very unusual. The scary part is, we don't know if this is the new winter.
Let's hope not.
And we'll suffer through these snowy days next year. But it has been 2 very unusual winters.
That's what everyone keeps telling me when I'm in the community. This is very unusual.
One thing that I really, there's been so much confusion about how the makeup time and the number of hours, how that is calculated. I really would like to see us explain that better to staff in the community so everyone's on the same page and has that knowledge.
Dr. James, do you want to talk about the program briefly, about how we track that information?
Right. Tracy, and my hat's off to Tracy Dixon, one of our senior business support analysts. Tracy Leonard.
His hat's still off to her.
Right. Tracy Dixon, that was her name before she was married, some time ago. I'm sorry, Tracy. It's a computer program that actually calculates each day of the year. So whenever we start calendar discussions, I'll tell her what she wants to do. She'll go in, create a new schedule, new bell schedule, whatever, based on each day that I'm having her reference. And then, because it's a spreadsheet, then it's going to calculate the minutes for us and tell us whether we're over or whether we are short in any school. And then we go back and, with Tracy's help, make adjustments to make sure we are counting the hours. And we'll do that for elementary, middle, and high schools. So we actually get what it is each period in the high school, each period at the elementary school, and then for the full day at the elementary. Quite a complex. I think I said elementary, but it was middle school. Right.
And if I could add a note, we just met with the middle school principals to look at their schedule, and because of the 2-hour delays and what days they may fall on, and then if we need to early release students because of inclement weather coming in, it can be, you can look at the hours by period and really have one place where you're over by a lot and another place where you're under significantly. So we were meeting to actually shift the bell schedules ever so much, by a little bit, to bring them all closer in time in terms of where they were over or under. So it is a very complex system that was developed by IT, and it really allows us to calculate to the minute in every single class period.
Right. And I can say another thing that impacts when I'm talking about per period, your early release days. Since we're on block schedules, many of them have been on an A day, which means you're going to reduce the hours on A days, and that happens several times in that calendar. That creates an issue for us.
Which cuts into the 140 for those A-day subjects.
Right, and then the 2-hour delays, a lot of those were on the same day.
And we've actually had years where we've repeated actually an A day or a B day 2 days in a row to get us on a cycle where we help to address that difference.
Because we need to equalize it as much as we can when we look at what's happening in that calendar and the complexities to equalize that time, because we know what it means in the end.
Well, I'm glad we had the conversation, because Cindy, you're right, as far as the community doesn't have the knowledge of how much complex and data-driven information decisions have to be made at central office and even with principals and buildings to get us to meet the mandates. Now, normally the process would work, Dr. Shandor, that this would come to the board at our next regular scheduled meeting. Is that still the intent?
I'd like for us to do that. There was one other item we talked about with when you look at next year. I think the minutes needs to be a discussion point for next year. If we had, as Dr. James said earlier, we had 18.32 or 34 minutes, 18 hours and 34 minutes banked. And the history is showing us 2 years in a row that we've been 7 and now 8 days plus numerous half days and an early dismissal. Dr. James, if you could talk to how many minutes it would take for us over the course of a year to add, what that would look like.
Right, and I'll talk about elementary, because that's the easiest to conceptualize. If you add it, for every 2 minutes you add over the course of the year, you're roughly banking a day. So if you were to add 4 minutes, 2 days, 6 minutes, 3 days.
Can we request that, or can we look? And I say that Dr. Jones in the beginning of the report talked about the background. You know you're not going to school before Labor Day. That's not going to happen. You know when school is going to end. So in between the beginning and the end, you've got to get everything else in there. You can build in snow days, but where else are you going to put the other days? I mean, it's a no-brainer to me. So can we add now a few minutes that's already built into the instruction that we can? I hear what you're saying, Robbie, about we truly have lost instruction days. But if it's a point that we can add time now to be on the safe side next year, and I know the teachers don't want to hear this, but may have to restructure a lecture or two that maybe this day a little bit more is accomplished. I don't know.
Well,
But
right now, we're looking at 20 minutes already added for the rest of the school
for
year.
this school year, but
So-
that's not here.
No, but if it was like, let's say we do a 6-minute increase in our day, we're less likely to end up with a 20-minute increase at the end of our school year for the next, semester and a half, or whatever we got
6 will
left.
give you 3 days?
Yeah, roughly 3 days, yes.
One thing I would like, if you could go through, give us some kind of comparison of how our district compares to every other division in the state as far as school hours. And also find out, it seems like each county or city calculates their hours in a different way. And I just read an article from the Fairfax Times about Fairfax recalculating their method, or coming up with a new method of calculating their hours this year to bank so many days. Well, how do they do that? Is that legal? Is that something we need to look at? I mean, I don't want us living in a bubble. I would like for us to see what the other school divisions are doing in the state and see if that's something we want to consider and how we compare with the number of hours for elementary school, middle school, and high school.
Mr. Mentor?
Thank you, Ms. Bevan. Dr. James, does the state audit that time? Do they actually come in and check that?
No, but I can tell you in the spring, there's a SOQ compliance report. And we have to also talk about the standards of accreditation to see if we have met the requirements. And we have to sign off to say that, yes, we have met or we have not met.
Good. Thank you.
One question about the missed time that gets to the quality. I mean, what are you guys doing with the teachers, to, especially the high school classes that meet every other day? What are you guys doing as far as talking with principals and teachers to find out how are you going to ensure that the information's not crammed into the last few days and they really don't understand the information you're teaching? What's that plan?
Well, the difficulty with that is, we haven't met with our principals during this time period because of all the days that we've been out. We had a meeting that actually got canceled, rescheduled, and canceled again because of the snow. So we'll have that conversation this month with our principals. But they've already started having those conversations with their staff because they're having conversations with us. In fact, today in a meeting, one of the principals asked with some, the Discovery Education cohorts that we have. We've got training in March and April, and they've already said, can we cancel that training because the teachers don't want to be out of the classroom because of all the instructional time that's been lost. I don't even want to get a substitute. So I've already had a conversation with my staff to say, okay, how can we do this? Can we move it into next school year and just finish the training next school year versus do we survey the teachers? What conversation do we have? So the conversations have already started with regard to it. We've had conversations with our elementary principals in terms of the additional 20 minutes. They won't all use it in the exact same way. Some of them shared that they will add it to their reading or to their math time. Others said that they'll give a little bit more time to science and social studies. They all spoke to the fact that in terms of that tier 2, the remediation piece or the enrichment piece, that they'll use that additional time in that way. And it really, at the elementary level, it's the easiest because you can block that, and I don't mean to say it's the easiest, but because it's not separate periods where you're getting 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there, they're getting that time and they can block it into a certain time period if their schedule allows them to do that.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah, that's what I kind of was getting at. Moving forward, we really need to have some of these
Absolutely.
things.
All right. Go ahead, Robbie.
The other thing is, and this is kind of a, what do places that have a lot of snow, what do they do that we don't do? I mean, I'm just wondering, obviously, is
Well,
it
the
just a
majority-
whole different infrastructure?
Well, the majority of those school divisions can start before Labor Day. So when you can start 2 or 3 weeks before Labor Day, it certainly opens up your calendar.
But they generally go to school, I think, and it's just, well, no, I'm saying,
This is what it looks like.
what is that?
The state, everybody in blue gets to start before Labor Day, everybody in yellow starts on Labor Day.
I'm getting at logistics. In other words, places that get a lot of snow don't close that many days. They have ways to take care of the snow and safely get those kids there. I don't know. I'm just curious. It's a question. How does,
I mean, but
you know, if
that's-
this were going to start happening, is that something that VDOT would step up possibly and would there be, help a little bit? I mean, some of these back roads, I feel like the secondary roads didn't get the attention this time that they have in the past. I don't know why, but
Tax
that's my
cuts.
thought.
Well, one thing I looked at, I was looking at all of these different counties and their bell schedules and their snow days, and I saw Goochland County, which is just on the other side of Richmond, is going to start, they've already approved their next year's calendar. They're going to start August 24th. They're going to have pretty much all the days off we have, except the Wednesday before Thanksgiving is also a day off. They have 2-week winter break. They get out June 3rd. And if you start to, subtract the weeks, you think, well, that kind of mirrors ours. Is it the length of the day or what is it? Because they have 9 snow days built into that calendar. So is it the length of the day? Is it because they start in August? I'm not
Could be a
really sure.
combination of all three.
Could be. Well, I guess, Barbara, I hear what you said, and I'm kind of in that mindset of going, all right, right now, we've just added 20 minutes to a day for the remaining of the school year, just to get us out of this hole. If we give the nod to the staff and the superintendent and staff to bring us something at our next regular scheduled meeting that would add 6 minutes, and then now we bank 6 days, right? 6 days.
6.5.
Then with what we already have in the calendar, as far as if the snow hit early and we could pull President's Day and such, that might keep us from getting into this predicament again the third year. But I guess, how does everybody feel? I mean, because they're going to bring us a
Got to
recommendation.
do something.
So is everybody okay with that recommendation?
Yeah, please, everybody. We saw that in the emails to us. So,
Well, I'd like to see a comparison of how our hours compare to the other divisions in
I
the
can give
state.
you just as far as our local school divisions, I know our elementary schools in our region, they vary. So some have hours of 6 hours and 15 minutes, and some have hours of 6 hours and 45 minutes. So there's about a 30-minute swing there. And we're what, Carl?
6 hours and 36 minutes.
Right, so we're sort of right in the middle of that.
hadn't be
So,
close.
and again, that's just our region. We reviewed the local divisions that we often compare ourselves to.
And that makes sense, because that's the calendar that we're comparing to, too. So, but I understand where Cindy's coming from.
When you think about those minutes, think about that in terms of days. So we're at 6:36, another school division might be at 6:45. Remember, 2-minute increments is going to equal a full day. So it's,
And you're talking about elementary school.
Right.
But the only issue that I have is Coventry and Grafton Bethel get out so late as it is, and then there are a few other elementary schools that are on their bell schedule. I really hate for elementary school kids to be getting home at 4:30, 4:45 in the afternoon. They have a short window at night. And we talked about school hours. I don't know if we want to bring up that conversation earlier than after the budget and talk about Virginia Beach is creating a task force of stakeholders, parents, administrators, teachers, principals, to look into the school hours and the start times. And I don't know if that's something we want to do in connection with this, but that's a very long day for those elementary school students when they are getting to school at 8:45 and getting home at 4 or 4:30.
I know this belabors it, but the schools that are the late dismissals,
Yes, ma'am.
could we look at probably the initial buses and drivers to get more buses on the road to just handle the late, you don't have the drivers circling back and so forth. Can we get those released elementary kids out a little bit early so they won't be? Well, we said they are delayed release now.
Well, part of the reason Coventry and Grafton Bethel are delayed release is because of the mess on Highway 17, and the buses can't get there in time. That's why they delayed their schedule last year. and the year
Right.
So
before.
17 is still gonna look like that next year.
All right, well,
You know, it's quite a complex issue, and what we're talking about, and sometimes we talk about bus capacity and length of runs. Right now, we had to move those schools to later because the buses couldn't get there. We used to have 10 elementary schools. There used to be an even split, 5 and 5, the early schools, the late schools. And at one point in time, Magruder was a middle school as far as timing. Now, if you look at it, we have 6 that are on the latest schedule, starting at 9 and ending at 3:36, versus 4 that start at 8:45 and end at 3:21. So we could run an analysis, see what it would take, and we could possibly shorten some bus runs, which now we need more buses in there across those 6 schools to actually shorten the times. So we're talking about drivers, bus assistants, and buses.
money.
To actually do that.
Mr. Mentor, where are you with having staff bring in a recommendation with, with additional minutes added to a school day with the calendar?
I'm open to it.
Barbara?
Yeah, this-
Cindy?
I'm open to 2 or 3 minutes, but I can't support something that's going to have children and kindergartners in my district getting home at 4:45 at night.
I think we're looking, it's 6 minutes was a max, wasn't it, that we were talking about?
Yeah, because right now we're at
Yeah.
Well-
20.
Gives about 3 days.
Right, so if you add 6 minutes, well, essentially next year we'll have 6 days in bank time.
Because right now we're looking at 20, so your students now are getting home much later with the predicament we're in now with a 20-minute extension of the day. Does 6
Going from
minutes?
6:36 to 6:40.
Mr. Medford,
Yes.
maybe I missed,
6:42.
Dr. James, what I've been getting out of this is to the end of the day, or is it possible to do it to the beginning of the day? I haven't heard. Or are we all talking about the end of the day?
Well, I had a brief discussion today with middle school principals about what we could possibly do, because middle affects the elementary runs. And some of the things we could possibly do there to take a look at arrival time, what adjustment we could make. So maybe that's a good suggestion. Maybe some of the time could be added before the day, just however that works out. With what we can look at, transportation, the average arrival time for buses at middle school and high schools. Because now we can track that time so we know what it is by each school, just to see what adjustment we could possibly make if there's a possibility of adding some of the time at the beginning of the day and also at the end of the day. Because I'm too concerned about, now we're in daylight saving time. In the morning, it's not as light as it was last week for high school kids. Elementary, it's daylight now. But when we get in December and January,
It's going to be dark when they get home.
yeah, so we got to kind of weigh all of that as we look at the calendar. As you know, we discussed during school start times, how that changes during certain months of the year.
Dr. George, where are you?
Well, I'm okay with it. I have two things I think I would caution on for adding this, and then we're going to come back and change everything and talk about school start times. We don't want to be doing this 2 and 3 times. So I guess I'm wondering if it's part of a bigger conversation, as Cindy mentioned, and I don't know. But I mean, to change all of that and get, parents changing their schedules and everything, and then come back and say, okay, by the way, now we're going to go ahead and change all this again. I think maybe we ought to at least have that conversation if we're not going to change school start times in general, maybe just focus on this alone. But I think we need to at least be aware that that could be a conversation also. Second thing is, once again, we're adding minutes and we're doing what the state makes us do, but I would just ask that we continue to think about the lost instruction, some contingency planning for that, as we move into next year.
And the one question I had, I have not heard if the Thursday hours from the early release and the Friday, if there's a makeup plan for those days and how that affects the current schedule.
Yep. Well, our staff is working through that. They began that process today, and we're hoping to complete that process tomorrow for a recommendation.
All right, short term, yes.
Yeah, may I ask a question?
Sure.
Because I think we have two issues on the table. Approving the calendar with X number of days. I don't think there are many options for days, but the other part would be school hours. So is the board saying we want the school hours done when we approve the calendar, or are we going to approve the calendar and modify school hours?
You talking about school start times?
Calendar.
Bigger,
Operating hours, the length
Operating
of the day.
within the confines of the calendar.
Right.
Okay.
I think that comes later. I mean, we really don't have anything to work with the calendar as far as days are concerned, unless we want to take away holidays. We've got the 180 days, and I don't see any other leeway, and especially if we're going to work as a region.
Yeah, so
Except for, like I said, President's Day, I think everybody would probably.
I think we're good with the calendar. That's pretty much,
Yeah, I'm in agreement with that.
we're good with that. It's just, I think that what we do short term, and then, of course, what Cindy and Robbie's talking about, the long term, with the start times.
So then we don't have to address tonight
The minutes.
6 minutes longer to address this. We can pass this and then we'll see where that puts us. I
Yes.
just want clarification.
But I think it's, at this point in the year, staff needs a nod, I guess, from us if we are going to support additional minutes to next year, even though we may end up in a conversation later about start times, but still in that, are we going to bank some minutes or are we not going to bank minutes, I guess? Can that wait until April or May, or does that need to be done earlier than later?
It could be April, May.
Then why don't we bring that back as a work session item in April?
We can bring back a few options to the table for
Options,
minutes
right.
for the April work session.
All right, so let's do that.
And then the calendar.
Will be voted on the 30th. Okay. All right, any other questions on the calendar? All right. Now, highlight of the evening, our FY16 operating budget update. This will Obviously, just for point of clarification, our next meeting, which is March 30th, we have to approve our school board budget because it has to go to the Board of Supervisors before the end of the month. And so, and we have a joint meeting scheduled with the Board of Supervisors on the 31st of March. So tonight, the goal is to bring some final decision for us as a board to this becoming ours as a budget, and then I'm voting on it March 30th. So with that, Dr. Shandor.
All right. Dennis Jarrett is now going to present an update on the state revenue, the proposed adjustments to the superintendent's budget, and finally an update on a few other funds.
Thank you, Dr. Shandor. Mr. Medford, school board members, well, this is the one thing that didn't get slowed down by the snow, and that's the State General Assembly. So let's applaud that, maybe give them an Oscar. It's that time of the year.
It was a good year for
It was a
them.
good year. They actually ended their session on the 26th of February, 2 days before it was supposed to close. So it was 2 days early, and that's a real positive thing. And what I'm going to do tonight is I'm going to walk you through, the last time you saw this spreadsheet, we stopped it right there. That was on the governor's proposed. Now, since then, we've had 3 other events occur. The House proposed a budget, the Senate did, and then the General Assembly actually approved a budget. So I'm not going to take a lot of time to talk about the House proposal and the Senate proposal. I want to take you right to where the General Assembly column and talk about what went on there. And so if you look at the General Assembly, you'll see the sales tax number went up. And that's one of the things that the state looked at very closely in the end of the session because the economy in Virginia was picking up. And so they decided that it was time to do a reevaluation on the sales tax, which they did. And so they bumped that number up. But oddly, if you look at basic aid, it went down. And that's because, you've heard me speak of this before, there's a relationship between sales tax and basic aid in their formula that they use. So as sales tax goes up, basic aid goes down. But there is still a positive gain when that happens for school divisions. Now, what the most important thing that took place was this next line item, compensation supplement. The House and the Senate had included that in their proposal. The General Assembly did as well. Now, each one had the same percentage in, which is 1.5%. But what each one was different on was when the date would start, what would be the start date of the increase. Well, the way it worked out is, I got that on a footnote back here, the General Assembly ultimately approved an effective date of August the 16th. So what that means is this, and this is a very positive thing because in many years, what the General Assembly would do, they'd approve a percentage increase, but it'd be effective in January. So what that would have meant for a school division is you would have got effectively half of the funding that you would have normally gotten for a full year raise. Well, they set the date at August the 16th, and which is a good time to do that because teachers' contracts in most school divisions start in September. So that means we get the full year funding of the 1.5% increase, which is a good thing. Now, what that means is that we do have to certify that we're going to provide an average of a 1.5% increase to our teaching and support staff. It includes both of those groups. And the good news is there is a average, it's noted on that very top line, but they did it as an average. So what that means is you have the ability to work your pay scale how you deem appropriate as long as on average it's a 1.5% increase. Now that's important because some school divisions may choose to say we're going to do a step for our teachers. If they did that and people at the top of the scale got nothing, you could still meet this requirement because it's an average where the rest of the steps on the scale would bring up that increase since the folks at the top did not get that. So that's really important. It gives you flexibility as a school board to determine how you're going to do that. Now, the other good part of this is that the superintendent's proposed budget, which is out on the street now, includes a 2% average adjustment, which includes a step, and also it includes a restored step for staff that have more than 5 years, that have lost more than 5 steps. So the bottom line is, we met this requirement. We have already met it. So that $535,000 that was up there on that spreadsheet really comes to us in addition to what we have already included in the budget. So that money becomes available to the school division to use. Now, I want to take you down to the bottom. Nothing else really changed at that point of any significance from what the governor had proposed. So if you go down and you look at the change in the state revenue as compared to FY15, it's about $1.6 million. Well, when we put forth the superintendent's proposed budget, you may recall, we did not use the governor's proposal for revenue. We used what the House Appropriation Committee had put out, and we estimated that. So when you look at what is in the superintendent's proposed budget, it's $1,607,000, and what's in the actual state-approved budget is $1,609,000, giving us a net increase of $1,928. I can't tell you I'm excited.
Hey, we'll take every penny we can
we're
get.
taking everything, but I'm not losing a lot of sleep over that increase there. But it is. But remember, though, because we've already built that increase into the superintendent's proposed budget. They did one other thing, too, which is a good sign. They also further reduced the VRS rates. And the way they did that was the way the governor had originally proposed to do the reduction. They pushed over money to the VRS fund to buy down the rate. So they're not really pushing this liability out. They just bought the liability down. And that saves us $57,000, bringing us to the net increase in resources of $59,000 with the state budget. Any questions on that now before I move on to the next piece of this? Okay, so keep these numbers in mind because we're going to talk a little bit more about them over here. Now, what I would like to do is, we've had a public hearing now on the superintendent's proposed budget. Each one of you have provided feedback to the superintendent on his proposed budget and things that you would like to discuss as related to that. And so what we have done is kind of put together a spreadsheet, if you will, to encapsulate those discussions and also to share with you some new information that we have. Really, in one case, it's literally new as of today. Let's take it, I reversed the order of this to do expenditures first. So we'll look at expenditures. These are adjustments, again, to the superintendent's proposed budget that are being recommended. The first one is Virginia Power. We pay our rates based on a state formula, or a state group, rather. I think it's called VEPCA, Virginia Energy Power Group. And what we do is we use those rates, which are, I guess you might say, consolidated rates based on governments in the state. So it's a lower rate than you would pay if you were a homeowner and that kind of thing. But they've got a rate increase this year, and we were notified of that just recently. The net average of the rate increase is 2.5%. However, our rate structures for Virginia Power is based on what they call schedules. Mr. Mead and his staff have looked at those schedules and looked at these new rates and costed it out, and it's going to be a $75,000 increase in those rates. So that's something we can't avoid, so we're recommending that go into the budget. The second item is the foundation, the York Foundation for Public Education. This is a group of folks that do tremendous work in the community, and they do tremendous work in our schools. How do they do that? They raise money, and those funds are then used in our schools for grants and various things that our teachers and other staff use for instructional purposes. The foundation has requested that is there any way that we can share more in some of their overhead costs that they have. For example, there's two primary areas. They have a foundation liaison, a coordinator, and that coordinator is funded in part by the foundation and funded in part by the school division. They also have a secretarial position. That position is funded in part by us, in part by them. So what we have had discussions with is, what they've asked us to do is to consider us picking up a larger share of the secretarial services. And with that, what they want to do is pick up a larger share of the coordinator's position, because that coordinating position right now is about 31 hours. It's not a full-time position. And frankly, they're struggling paying for that, because they're paying for a part of that. So this is really intended to provide a little bit of relief to the foundation as they potentially start looking at their next campaign. And so maybe over time, we can have another discussion with them about picking this up again. But I think at this point, it's probably a good move on our part to consider this, because it gives them more flexibility to start leveraging dollars in the community by sending their coordinator out in the community to do good work. And so this is a small amount. We've talked to the, I guess it's the president, the chairman of the foundation, and he supports this recommendation wholeheartedly. Okay, the third item is, it's really just good news for everybody, if you will. When the superintendent's budget was proposed, it included a 3% reduction in the health insurance rates. Okay, that 3% reduction was not only applied to the employer, but we were going to apply that to the employee. So what that meant was, as the employer, we would see a reduction in our costs for health insurance by the 3%, and the employee would see a reduction in their costs through their payroll deduction if they were participating in the plan. Well, recently we contacted, actually last week, or late last week, contacted Anthem, our insurance provider, and wanted to get an update on what they thought actuarially we could do with this. We have a very fiscally sound health insurance fund, and I'm proud to say that. Our school division is one of probably very few, maybe in the state. I don't know this to be a fact, but I can't help but believe that we got one of the most fiscally sound health insurance funds around. And because of that, and also because our claim experience is really good now, Anthem has agreed to go ahead and reduce the rates another, or by 3%. It was originally 3.6, now another 3, bringing it to a total of a 6.6% reduction in health insurance rates. That is significant, and it's not anything we've seen in any near term in this organization. Now, what is really good about that is I just looked at the health insurance premiums that we charge, and if you're an employee and you're on the Key Care Single Plan, this is going to save you about $29 a year. Okay, if you're on the family plan, it's going to save you about $327 a year. So this puts money in the pockets of our employees in addition to whatever you do for compensation. So, and even more importantly, or as importantly, it puts money back in your pockets that you then can use for other purposes. So that's what that $318,000 is. By doing that additional 3%, it generates for you another $318,000 in savings. So we can then use those in the budget to balance it as well.
So we have, what, 636,000?
That's more. It's a little more than that, because this 318 is based on 3%. The 3.6 had a higher number with it.
Do you know what the total is?
Not off the top of my head, I don't. It was approximately $360,000 the first round. So it's going to be close to $380,000. The fourth item is, again, the VRS retirement rate reduction of going from 15.15 to 15.06, and we saved the $59,000 there. And then the last item is, let me see if I can increase the size of this. The last item is, I'll be frank with you, it's a balancer. This was just because we wanted to balance this out. We have an actuarial study done on a defined benefit plan every year. The plan is fully funded. And so we have a contribution budgeted for that plan, so we can go ahead and reduce that at this time. And in doing that, that means we have a total net expenditure decrease of $316,000. Now, so our budget is going down by $316,000. Now let's take a look at the revenue side of this. All right, we got the $1,900 that's coming from the General Assembly. Now that's more, well, I think it's by the ordinance, but we're taking it. We're taking it.
We're not giving it back. That's for sure.
Not going to give it back. Now, this is a new item, and I have to tell you, this happened today. That's how new this is. I got an email from NAFIS, the National Association of Federally Impacted Schools. We're a member of that group, and they wanted their membership to know that there's going to be a payment made in fiscal year 16 for fiscal year 13. That's the impact aid fiscal year 13. Remember, they have 5 years to pay this stuff out. So they're going to do this, and it's a very moderate adjustment, but that moderate adjustment would generate about $288,000 for us. So if you recall, in the superintendent's proposed budget, there's a line item for impact aid. We had recommended that go down by $300,000. So we're just picking it back up. Now, it's my obligation to tell you this. This is one-time money, okay? So this doesn't go away. All it does is postpone it. Okay? So it's just another day is going to come. We have to deal with this. But it gives us some flexibility, at least for next fiscal year. So that is a revenue add-on of $300,000. Now, what is being proposed with these additional expenditure reductions and with the additional revenues we're looking at is to take that net of $618,000 and reduce the contribution increase request to the Board of Supervisors. Now, you'll see the footnote down here that we've got, which is right now, the request that's included in the superintendent's proposed budget is $1,650,848 as an increase. If we take that 618 and reduce that, the increase is now going to be $1,032,848. I feel like that this goes a long way on the part of the school division, the school board, and trying to close the gap, that we're looking at between the potential gap, let's say, between us and the Board of Supervisors once they eventually approve a budget. And it also takes a lot of the pressure off them. It's a big difference between $1 million and $1.6 million. And so I feel like that using these funds in this way is a responsible, fiscally way to show that we are trying our best to make our request to them a reasonable request. Even though the 1.6 was reasonable, we're still trying to make effort at reducing that further. So this is the plan that right now is on the table for that, based on our discussions with you guys over the past weeks, as well as our own information gathering. So I will open it up at this point. Well, before I do that, I probably want to reiterate something Mr. Medford said, which is we do have a schedule, and the schedule that we're up against right now is this. You, by statute, by Code of Virginia, you have to deliver your budget to the Board of Supervisors by April the 1st. You're required to do that. You don't approve your budget until March 30 this year. So effectively, when you approve your budget on the 30th, I've got to have that budget already printed. It's got to be ready to go, because that next morning, someone's going to drive that down to the county administrator's office and give it to them so we meet the statutory requirement. So the reason I'm saying this is this. Tonight you have a work session. We're in here now. We don't have another one scheduled for this month. We can do one if there's more dialogue that needs to take place with this. If not, and we get the nod from you tonight that this is acceptable, we will begin preparing the budget with this information, and then the resolution that we bring to you on the 30th will include this as well.
Mr. Jerry, based on the shape of Route 17, you better take it a day earlier.
I think you're right, Mr. Mentor. In fact, I'm going to use Air Express on that.
Well,
Driving Highway 17 to this school board meeting tonight and stuck in 45-minute traffic from the southern end, the road is crumbling, and I was thinking to myself, we're going to have to replace the entire fleet of buses as they travel this road daily. It is in bad shape.
or pay for a lot of front-end alignments on those buses. Well, I think this is fantastic news, and for our staff Dennis, for you to put this together with that last-minute information and bring it to us as quickly as you did. Very reasonable request for us to be able to do the things that we found as priorities, that Dr. Shandor found as priorities, that brought to us, that we align with, and to request a little over $1 million from our local counterpart governing body to be able to do the things we need to do for YCSD and then accomplish what the superintendent has proposed in his budget. and now even lowered our health care expenditure on our own, but also to our employees even more to make up for some of that co-pays they've had to increase out of pocket and stuff. So that really helps balance that out. This is great news. I mean, great
What
news.
percentage increase is that from?
It was going to be about 0.5%, I believe, would be about right.
About a 0.5% increase from last year.
And closer maybe to 1%. Closer to 1%.
Couldn't remember what the numbers were.
Let me do the calculation on
That's
that.
fine. I was just
What I'm-
wondering.
I'm having a blank on what their total contribution is right now. That's why I'm having a blank on that one, but I'll get back to you on that. So that's kind of where we are right now with this. And unless there's something else that you as a group want to talk about.
Is everybody good with what?
Thank you for your hard work.
Yeah.
We'll be back at this once
Oh.
everything else has ended, and then, this doesn't end.
You're
We're gonna
exactly
have to
right.
balance something down the road,
Right.
so.
Unless they
But this is great, unless they fund us.
fund us at our request.
That's correct, that's correct.
Ms. Kursk, anything you'd like to share?
No, I'm fine with this. I'm excited to see the additional savings. Thank you for looking into that with Anthem. I'm very pleased to see that.
Just unheard of.
Well, it's
with health
remarkable, but I think it's because we went back, we adjusted our plan, we made some changes to something, and our pool, I mean, it's not as much pool on it,
It's
which can
claims
change,
experience. We've
which
had
can
good
change,
experience.
so.
Great, it's great.
All right, well then, we look forward to bringing that on March 30th for our approval, and then moving it quickly, swiftly down the road, and then our joint meeting with the board of supervisors to kind of clarify or answer any questions they have on the 31st, and then wait for them to make their decision.
Exactly the
Now,
process.
their decision will be made
It's early May.
early May. Okay.
Mr. Carter's budget is March 17th for the county.
Yes.
That's when he
correct. That's
releases
correct.
it, and then they approve theirs on early May.
We meet with them on next Tuesday. Next,
No,
the
the
31st.
31st, all right, so we have 2 meetings in a row. All right, with nothing.
Couple
yes.
other items, Mr.
Okay.
Matt, I need to go over this way.
Oh, that's right, I forgot about that, I'm about ready to jump off that.
You also have 2 other funds that you work with, and I'm bringing these to you tonight. We talked about the health and general insurance fund already, and the one I'll talk to you about next is the workers' comp fund, which we haven't talked about. But as a part of the resolution, budget resolution that you will be considering on the 30th, it also includes these funds as well. So we just wanted to tell you about those. And if you look at FY16, you'll see that it is a projection to go down, and that reflects because the rates are going to go down. And the assumption is the cost would flow with that. So the health insurance fund would look like this. And I would say about this fund and the next fund we're going to talk about, the budgets that are developed for these funds really aren't intended to be, okay, let's spend all of this money, or this money will be spent. It's really just a guide, because when you look at their health insurance contributions and the health insurance experience, same thing with the dental insurance and the dental expenditures, what you're really looking at is that if those costs get incurred, then they have to flow through the fund. So the budgets on this are just good faith estimates as to what the costs are going to be. If by some chance the costs were to come in more than this, which I don't think that's going to happen because we set these up pretty high, if it should come in more, we would come back to you for a budget revision later in that year. If they don't, then these budgets are set and they're good. But I just want you to know that both of these funds, it's basically just driven by experience. So if the expenditures are incurred, they're reflected in here, and what other premiums are collected, they're reflected in here. Okay, then this last fund is the workers' comp fund, and it's basically the same. And last year we spent about, I think it was around $350,000 in this fund. You never know what it's going to look like. I am a little bit interested in seeing how the experience on this fund goes for this year, because we did have a few slip and falls related to the snow event and the ice event, and one of them has turned into a significant event for us in terms of cost. So we're going to be watching those this year to see how that plays out for us. But again, this is the same way, and this is a fund that we've had in place for probably 15 years or so.
Dennis, is this backed up by another, like if we have a catastrophic situation where all those monies are spent,
It is.
Like stop loss or?
Yeah, we have over $3 million in what we call a reserve fund for workers' compensation. And that's for that very purpose. Because one thing I didn't mention, in both of these funds, we are self-insured. We are self-insured. So if we had a year where we had a lot of claims, and they were significant claims, then yes, that's where that reserve would come into play. Okay.
All right.
That's it.
Thank you very much. All right, that finishes our presentations. Does anybody need a break before we move into the rest? Okay, let's go ahead and take a short break before our action item. Yeah, we could do that. So we'll take a break now and then come back. Well,
Whichever.
We just have the one action item.
just one action item.
Is it a
Paige.
closed session?
All right, let's go ahead and do the action item. All right, you good with that,
Yeah,
Paige?
yeah, I'm good with that.
All right, the action item is a consideration approval of a personnel action. It's in your folder. I need a motion to approve.
Move motion to approve.
Second.
Second.
Any questions, comments? Mrs. Ford?
A motion was made by Dr. George and seconded by Mrs. Kersky to approve the personnel actions. Dr. George?
Yes.
Mrs. Kersky?
Yes.
Mr. Mentor?
Yes.
Mrs. Haywood?
Yes.
And Mr. Medford?
Yes, thank you. All right, we're going to take a short recess, and we'll come back and do a closed,
Go into
yeah,
closed
go into
session.
closed session, yeah. All right, we're going to return our special meeting to order. A couple of things before we go into our closed session. Dr. James, I believe you have some information about Route 17 that Cindy had to fight getting here while her front tires fell off her vehicle. So,
Right. Mr. Lash and I serve on the Transportation Safety Commission for the county. Today, Mr. Lash attended a meeting, and they discussed Route 17 and how it's rapidly deteriorating. So I'd like for Mr. Lash to share with us and the community the plan for Route 17 based on discussions today at the Transportation Safety Commission.
that'd be
Thank you.
great news.
Good evening, Mr. Medford, board members. In regards to the widening program, the pothole situation, it seems like will be rectified hopefully soon. From what we understand from a memo that was sent from VDOT to the commission is they will be putting an overlay over 17 in those rough areas. And I surely agree with you about that. I know my county vehicle gets beat up, but I now am kind of dodging them. And unfortunately, the lines were bad, but on my way to the meeting, which was at Andrea's Italian Pizza down in the Grafton area and Coventry area, Spivey was out painting new stripes. So hopefully they will return once the overlay is placed. So hopefully soon they will put the overlay down and smooth things out for us, because it is a bumpy ride. It's a bumpy ride for our buses and our citizens. So.
Thank you for attending that meeting and providing us with an update.
Yeah,
Well, I was very happy to hear that, because I know how rough it is in my car, but on a school bus, it's rough unless you have a full load. So.
In school buses, we don't have seat belts, so when it hits a bump and somebody goes in the air, somebody's gonna hit the floor.
And we don't have air ride, except in our special needs buses. So it's pretty bouncy on a 77 passenger school bus, which that's our full-size bus.
You could lose a whole bus in one of those things.
I hope not.
Right?
I hope not. So.
Thank you, Mr. Lash, for that information. And then we have one more thing we want to mention this evening.
Yeah, let's hold these up. These are from Bethel Manor, and I think they've been trying to have us come over there
And
for about
Candy.
3 weeks now. We've been canceled so many times.
And a mug.
Candy in here, and look at these. Aren't these
They're
great?
nice, with
Very
everybody's
nice.
signature.
Yes, they did a wonderful job
They did.
for School Board Appreciation Month, and the weather took out most of that month. But
I just want to say to Mr. Lombardo, I think I've rescheduled 3 times.
we have.
And you're at a point that I want to go, but I don't want to go because I don't want my presence to take away of instructional time.
Yeah.
So good luck to everybody in making that up, but it's been fun and I just don't want to take away.
Yeah,
I agree.
thank you. And Dr. George just took some of my chocolate from my mug to his mug. Yes.
This is for.
We also want to remind everyone that the school board and the superintendent, we're all holding public forums this month, and yours is the 1st of April. Barbara's is tomorrow night.
Tomorrow.
Mine is March 24th.
Mine is the 17th, but I did hear from the principal at TAB perhaps that we may need to change that, so I don't know. Stay tuned. Do you know anything about that?
The dates are
Oh,
listed on the
surprise.
website. They're all at 7 o'clock at the 4 high schools.
Yeah, and we're going to put out more information to remind folks of that too.
Haven't heard
So
anything.
Please come out. We want to see Bruton District at Bruton High School tomorrow night.
tomorrow, yeah, absolutely. We're in the need of a closed session. If somebody can take us into that, please.
Paige, you got it?
I move that the York County Board convene in a closed session pursuant to the Virginia Freedom of Information Act to discuss a personnel matter under Virginia Code 2.2-3711A1.
Second.
All right, Mrs. Ford?
A motion is made by Mr. Mentor and seconded by Mrs. Haywood that the school board go into closed session. Mr. Mentor?
Yes.
Mrs. Kersky?
Yes.
Mrs. Haywood?
Yes.
Dr. George?
Yes.
And Mr. Medford?
Yes, thank you. Board's in closed session.